All right, guys, Aaron Slater here, owner of Relentless Defender Apparel, and we are here in the Ground Zero Media Studios, and I am excited about a series that we're about to start, and it's with a guest of mine that is a great friend, extremely knowledgeable on a lot of things that we're going to start talking about, and I will tell you that if, for some reason, you're sensitive about the idea of police shootings, and the aftermath of police shootings, then this is not the show for you. I'll give you a little bit of background about who I am, only for the credibility aspect of things. But before I became the owner of Relentless Defender Apparel, I was a cop for 22 years. I was on the streets. I was an FTO. I was a detective. I worked undercover for about 6 years. I was an undercover sergeant for 2 of those years. I became a lieutenant over the patrol division. I've been the commander over the patrol division, along with commander over CID, a commander over dispatch. And a lot of the things that we are going to be discussing, especially when it comes down to chaotic moments and critical incidents, of course, I've been involved in. I've had to supervise those. I've also been an instructor at the police academy for the last 15 years. On top of that, my educational background is in leadership. I have an organizational leadership bachelor's degree and a leadership and management master's degree from Sam Houston. But, and also on leadership, I'm also a graduate of the Leadership Command College from the Texas Municipal, from LEMIT, the Law Enforcement Management Institute of Texas. But let me introduce my guest to get this started. This is Clint McNear, is a great friend of mine. He's a retired Garland police detective. He's currently the field supervisor, field services supervisor for TMPA, the Texas Municipal Police Association. And he's a co-owner of Advanced DNA, and he's also a subject matter expert witness in officer-involved shootings and use of force. So let me introduce him and let me just pull a little bit of information about him. But Clint, thank you to the show.
Thanks for having me on, man. Glad to be here.
So let's talk about your career just for a second. You spent your career at Garland Police Department for the most part, correct?
Yeah, I was an MP in the Marines, got out, and spent a brief period at Plano PD, and then spent the remainder of my career at Garland PD before retiring.
So how many years did you serve on the job?
22 total.
Okay, yeah, and that's where I'm at. I did 22 years. So I didn't, and I can tell you, I enjoyed about 90% of it. There was about 10% that I could have done without.
That's an accurate number.
But overall, I really did. I really enjoyed the majority of my career. There's issues and there was problems. Just like any other job, and we'll discuss some of that overall. But it's to me, there's a big difference about what's going on today compared to what's going on when you and I were cops. But let's talk about your credibility again. Let's talk about the field services supervisor for TMPA. So first of all, what is TMPA?
TMPA is Texas Municipal Police Association. It's association representing Texas cops. There's about 88,000 Texas cops. TMPA represents, I think, just short of 32,000 officers. We provide training, legal representation, representation at the Capitol during legislative sessions. But the bread and butter is legal representation during administrative, criminal, or civil issues.
Okay. And I'm not going to give a plug to TMPA. What I will give a plug to is if you're a cop in today's society, okay, whether or not you have TMPA or some other organization that is covering you, and I don't, because of course this goes nationwide. We have viewership nationwide. If you have some kind of coverage, and you're not taking advantage of that coverage, especially in today's day and time, you are literally going out there every single day and risking your family, risking your livelihood, risking your future. And I can tell you that if somebody hasn't told you that, then you don't have good leadership within your department. You don't have good mentorship within your department, because ultimately every single cop these days needs to have some type of representation. Would you agree?
You wouldn't have a Corvette without auto insurance. You shouldn't strap a gun on your thigh without having legal insurance, legal protection.
To me, that seems
single day.
Absolutely. I mean, that's probably a great scenario for that.
For a guy that owns a Corvette.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I make sure I have good legal insurance and good car insurance. So let's talk about your time with TMPA. How long you been with them?
10 years.
And what do you do for them now?
Field Services Supervisor. There's reps all around the state that take care of agencies, departments, officers, and handle issues. There's about 14 total. There's 2 Field Services Supervisor that we serve the troops in the field just to make sure things are handled and cops are taken care of the best that we can.
So like if an officer gets in a shooting, okay, or in some type of critical incident, but we'll use the word shooting mainly because that's what we're going to kind of focus on in today's topic. Officer gets involved in a shooting. He's covered by TMPA because he's paid his dues, and he contacts essentially a field rep. The field rep will then in turn contact an attorney, and a lot of times both the field rep and the attorney will make the scene. Am I correct in describing
They
this?
call the emergency number. I was at a shooting right before I got here. They call the emergency number. We find out, confirm they're a member. There's an attorney en route, and then generally a field rep, one of us will respond. And it's exactly what happened 6 or 8 hours ago. We sent an attorney out, and I got there about the same time he did, checked on everybody, and then headed down here to do this.
Wow. Just before you got here?
Yeah, literally, that's what I did just before I showed up here.
Okay. So these things are happening, and they're happening quite frequently. And it seems like the we'll call it the magnification of them are happening more and more and more. And of course, when you and I were in law enforcement, we knew these things were happening, but it didn't seem like they were magnified as much.
We're old enough there wasn't social media to
Sure.
document a shooting 40 seconds after it happened, which is fortunate for both of us.
Well, and then all the experts come out and they seem to think that they know everything that's going on.
Facebook law degrees.
That's right. That's right. So, of course, we've kind of got you covered with TMPA. You also, you're the co-owner of Advanced DNA. What is Advanced DNA?
We're doing forensic genealogy in cold cases. Essentially, the older cases that had DNA evidence, if they're entered in CODIS and the suspect isn't located, we have the ability to do forensic genealogy and help establish a suspect to assist in these cold case investigations, homicides, sexual assaults.
Okay. And then the last thing I want to talk about, which I think is probably going to be some of the most important to your credibility, is you are a subject matter expert witness in officer-involved shootings and police use of force.
Yes, sir.
And you've testified many times in legal proceedings and court proceedings to that. Is that correct?
Yeah, so most of it is on the civil realm, motions for summary judgment, trying to verify or prove up qualified immunity. Most of it is in the civil realm where that's been applicable so far.
Okay. So let's just jump right into this, guys. If you're a police officer, I completely recommend you not only paying attention to this and this series that we're going to go through, but share it. Share it with your friends. Share this this video with your friends, and ultimately discuss it with your friends. Because a lot of times, what we fail to do in law enforcement is have these hard discussions. We fail to kind of understand what's going on. But the one thing and the reason why I think that this series is going to be exciting and I think is important is because we see it all across the nation right now. There are police officers involved in police shootings, in critical incidents that are obviously, by anybody that has any common sense, obviously justifiable. They're justifiable from all angles. And we're seeing police officers get thrown under the bus regardless of how justifiable it is. And the thing about it is the times are changing to the understanding that just because it's justifiable doesn't mean that you're not going to go through hell and back because of all of the outlets that are coming together to say, hey, you know what, we don't care if it's justifiable. Well, the other side of it, what's important about this series, is you have 2 retired cops that in all reality, I can tell you, I'll speak for myself, that I don't care about what the other side that doesn't like law enforcement says, thinks, or wants to claim about me. And the reason why is because, well, I don't answer to anybody. And the problem with it is there's law enforcement officers across this nation that can't speak out, that can't speak up, because ultimately they're on the job still. They still have, sergeants and lieutenants and chiefs and councilmen and sheriffs, and ultimately they're under the scrutiny. So, well, what I will tell you from my side, and I think Clint's on board with this, is we'll be your voice, okay? In fact, I looked at TMPA, and the TMPA's motto is the voice of Texas law enforcement. Am I correct in saying that?
That's it.
So, but I will say from me, and I'm only going to speak for me, that I will be your voice. And I can't get fired, okay? And I will also tell you.
Danny won't fire you?
She won't fire me, okay? She won't fire me. And those of y'all don't know, Danny is my wife, which is a cop as well. She was a cop full-time, and now she still reserves. But we are a family of cops. My sister-in-law, who is the COO of Relentless Defender, she's now a retired police detective with the sheriff's office here. But either way, we have no kickback on this. We have no repercussion for saying what we say. I will also make it very clear, I am not going to sit here and bow down to bad police leadership. In fact, I will make it very clear that I think bad police leadership is the plague of law enforcement right now. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but I think we could save that for another show, is when we talk about bad police leadership. But we will touch a little bit about bad police leadership, because that plays into a lot of these critical incidents and why we're failing at dealing with these critical incidents. But let me just jump into it real quick and say, we have tons of critical incidents that we've witnessed over even just the past few years. I think a lot of it started really in Ferguson, okay?
Yep.
And even if we talk about the Darren Wilson case with Michael Brown, that was probably one of the first eye-openers where we sat there and said, okay, well, what is going on here? What did Darren Wilson do that was wrong, that this much backlash happened? And if we break that down and we understand what happened, honestly, the actual incident, we're going to isolate it to the incident, because that's really what we need to look at. The incident of Michael Brown attacking Darren Wilson, and Darren Wilson turning around and shooting Michael Brown. Yes, Michael Brown was unarmed. But we also understand, first and foremost, from the beginning of the academy, that there's always at least one gunfight in a police battle whenever a police officer is involved in that battle. Would you agree?
Absolutely. There's that one, at least one.
And that would be yours. And I teach use of force to law enforcement, and I also teach not only use of force, but control tactics and those types of things. And I can also say, with that being said, we would be ignorant to believe that gun belongs to us. That gun, the minute that you bring that gun into a situation, it equally belongs to both parties. And you need to start thinking about it in that perspective. In fact, all the tools on your belt and on your possession belong to both parties. It's who's controlling that gun is what matters. And I can also say that a lot of times, and I always give this reference, I always give this scenario, in the police academy, and I say, okay, you get called to a suspicious person in a parking lot. And I think we could play a lot of this off of this, because a lot of times, even if we have people watching this video right now that are doubters of police or the ones that are bringing up the rhetoric, I want you to put some empathy in this scenario and ask yourself, what would you do in this scenario? And I'll give you the scenario. You get called to an apartment complex, and the way I describe it even to the academy when I'm teaching use of force is you get called, somebody calls, says, hey, at the back of the parking lot in this apartment complex, there is a bunch of people standing around, and I see one specific guy, and he is handing what appears to be drugs to people walking up to him, okay? They describe the person wearing, let's just call it pink pants, a polka dotted shirt, and a cat in a hat. So there's no way that you can miss the description of this guy, okay? You pull up in a marked unit wearing a police uniform. And as soon as you start pulling through the parking lot, the guy wearing the cat in the hat decides to look at you and take off running. He jumps a fence, takes off running. So what do? You get out of your car, you take off running as well. Because and first and foremost, the first question is that common for somebody that just sees the police, that we just had prior information that he was suspected in dealing drugs? We didn't come up with that assumption. That was a caller that called us and let us know that. So we jumped the fence. We start chasing as well. Now imagine we chase across the field and we go into a wooded area, okay? We get into this wooded area, and as soon as we get to the wooded area, the cat in the hat turns around and says, shoot me, okay? And what do? We know that at that very moment, we don't have the legal right to shoot him. So what do? We transition. We transition from pistol to taser. We take our taser out. We pop him with the taser because after repeated commands, get on the ground, get on the ground, get on the ground, he refuses to get on the ground. So what tends to happen is we escalate from hand-to-hand combat, okay, and we go up one notch and we use a taser. So we tase him, okay, or we deploy a taser, and let's just say that the deploying of the taser did not work. The guy charges us because we're only within 21 feet, but typically these interactions are happening within 10 feet. Right. He charges us, gets us to the ground, and I can tell you right now, while we're on the ground, and let's just call him a 16-year-old, okay, regardless, we'll play it in the same understanding of some of these incidents that are happening right now. 16-year-old male that is about the same size of whoever it is that you're empathizing with, so the same size as me as I'm sitting here talking about it. He gets the upper hand, and he is now on top of me, and he's got both legs over my stomach, and he's blocking all of my tools, and he starts to grab me and just hit me. 1, 2, and he's hitting me as hard as he possibly can. And the entire time I'm asking myself, and I'm trying to fight, I'm trying to get him off me, I'm trying to struggle. I can't do it. And every hit is taking that much more energy out of you. Every hit, it's taking that much more fight out of you. And that's just human nature, okay? And what's happening to your adrenaline aspect? Your adrenaline aspect is up, but you're also losing energy because of how much adrenaline you're dumping. So then your mind starts setting in and you say, if I take another hit, I may black out. Now understand this. Gun. Exactly. And as I said earlier, that gun belongs to as much the suspect as it does you. So if I get hit one more time and I black out, even though he did not have a gun, he does now. Yep. And so I make the decision, and I'm scared to death. And in all reality, where the idea of you cannot shoot an unarmed person has come from, especially when we talk about this scenario, I think we'll kind of clear some of that up. So in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, I am scared to death. If I get hit one more time, not only does he have access to my gun, but if I'm knocked out, he could strangle me to death. He could pick up a rock, throw it on my head. He could do whatever he wants. He could stomp my head into the ground if he wants to. And in my perception, I sit there and say, oh my God, if I get hit one more time, all these scenarios can play out. But either way, I am scared for my life now. I am scared for what's going to happen right now. So what do? I have the ability to reach at one of these hits. I have the ability to reach for my pistol, and I reach up and I put that pistol underneath his gut and I fire twice. Why do we fire twice? Because it's better than once, right? And we also train that if you miss the first time, at least the second time is supposed to hit, right? But either
Shoot
way,
till the threat stops.
Absolutely. And we fire twice, and he immediately after the firing twice, he drops on me, and you realize that the fight is over. I roll him off me, right? And I get up, and I'm beat to death, okay? And he's laying there, and your partners show up because they heard the gunfire. And here's where the scenario is. Now you have, and let's just call it two ways, but the first way we'll say it is now we have a dead 16-year-old that everybody's looking at you and saying, what happened? Well, empathize and put yourself in those shoes just for a second. And immediately, everybody from the apartment complex, everybody from this around area is starting to pull their phones out, and they're starting to say things like, this 16-year-old innocent boy did nothing wrong.
He was an unarmed baby.
He was an unarmed, innocent child. Okay.
Yep.
And based on the exact scenario on the back end from another viewpoint, that is not the case.
Absolutely not.
Okay. Because let's start about where that started. It started with an officer that was not even involved in this understanding of things, gets a call to the police department from a citizen that wanted us and required us to do our job, to come to that apartment complex and at least investigate a potential criminal activity that we didn't observe, that we were called to.
Right.
So we're going to there, and we're relying on a concerned citizen's concern. And when we get there, if the innocent child would have just remained and said, "Hey, sir, there's nothing wrong. I'm just out here talking with my friends, and that there's no issue," what would we have done as law enforcement?
Yeah, you bring up so many topics on that. You bring up, in all these incidents we see, they all begin with some level of noncompliance. There's I challenge folks to find one where an officer pulls up, steps out, and shoots somebody. It begins with the person fought, or the person ran, or the person grabbed the officer's taser. There's some level of active resistance that occurs in all these. You hit on the gear on your belt, in retaining that gear. You know, you and I were fortunate enough, I guess you would say fortunate enough back then, pretty much carried a gun. Somebody may have an ASP or a baton back then, but because of the small amount of Batman gear that we wore, we actually knew how to go hands-on and handle that a lot. With the creation of all the Batman gear that's on everybody's belt with spray and tasers and all the other gear, there is some concern that people have become dependent upon all the Batman gear. And I've had some officers tell me that, you know, I depend on that taser or spray to work, and if it doesn't, you know, I'll have to reevaluate then. And there's still a time that you have to physically have an understanding of ground fighting or controlling somebody on the ground. And one more thing I'll hit on is, you mentioned justified when you first started several times, and it seems like the public and the media has really lost sight that there's a big difference between justified and what looks pretty. Mm-hmm. I had a judge ask me one time if I thought the force looked good, and I said, "Well, sir, there's no force looks good. Mm-hmm. There's justified force, but there's a human taking another human's life, being forced into that situation. It's never going to look good." And so I think there's an expectation that officer shooting that guy, it didn't look good. Well, it's never looks good taking another human's freaking life, but that doesn't mean it's not justified. It's like the old analogy of making sausage. Everybody wants to eat sausage, but they don't want to see it being made. And everybody jumps to the immediate conclusion it's a bad shooting, it's a bad use of force. Well, let's evaluate first the facts and justification, because it's never going to look pretty. That officer having to defend himself and punch that guy or shoot that person, it's never going to look good. Unless you're maybe a sadist, fighting and taking another human's life, it's never going to look good. Mm-hmm. And it's a messaging aspect, I think. But the whole scenario you gave plays out across our country weekly. Mm-hmm. Weekly.
Yeah, and I think that the problem with it is, and let's get into why there's a backlash on this deal. And one of the things that I believe is so if we just take that scenario, and the reason why I use that scenario is because we could pull up different scenarios that we've seen across, but without calling out any agency or without calling, I think that is the type of scenario that we're seeing across the board. And of course, it's not to the detail of every single one of these, but just here recently, we've seen one where an officer shot a suspect while she was in progress of trying to stab another person, and he's getting criticized for that.
Actively trying to murder another human and stops it.
Yeah.
Is criticized.
Exactly. And everything that we understand as far as the understanding of use of force is that our job is to first and foremost do the most selfless thing that we could possibly do, and that is put other people's lives before ours. So in this aspect is we're tasked as police officers to go out and understand that we will be willing to sacrifice our lives to save other innocent people. But you know what people forget to understand is it is not our job to sacrifice our lives for those that are non-innocent. And the people that are attacking law enforcement, I think they're asking for the impossible to sit there and say, well, why didn't you sacrifice your life for the idea that this 16-year-old boy that was shooting you, or the 16-year-old boy that was attacking you, or the 16-year-old boy that was trying to strangle you or kill you or beat you to death? Why don't you sacrifice your life for that? That is not our job, and it's not in our job description. And in fact, I think what also tends to happen is people tend to think that we have all this genie information that we're supposed to have, but it's all hindsight. It's all hindsight theory. So understand, when we arrived at this apartment complex, there is absolutely no information that we had or could gain that we knew this boy was 16 years old, first and foremost.
We have to go with what we're provided at the time.
And what we observe. And we also don't know if this guy has any kind of weapons on him. So when people sit there and say, well, he didn't have a gun or he didn't have a knife or whatever the case may be, that's hindsight. Yep. And you gotta sit there and call it out for what it is. We have so many people in this society today that somehow, some way, they claim to be these experts in understanding of what it is that a cop is going through. And one of the things about this show I think is important is these aren't just two guys that look at things from the outside. We were there. We've done these things. We've seen these things. We've felt these things. We've been through these things. And I can tell you that's what probably is the most irritant aspect of watching what's going on in society today, is to sit there and see that and then look at some idiot that is trying to dissect this and try to explain why that cop did something wrong when they've never, ever in their entire life wore a badge. They've never in their entire life sacrificed a damn thing. They've never had to kick a door in with the understanding that there's somebody that we already know has a gun on the other side of that door. They've never had the understanding of getting involved in an active shooter. They've never had to even had the idea that when I go in through this, whatever situation, I'm willing to die to sacrifice my life to save the innocent. But yet they're more than willing to tell us how we did something wrong.
That's the shooting I was out on right before I got here. Crowds showed up and started chanting and cussing the police, and it's interesting because what you said, we have a sense of purpose is why we serve, and there's a willingness to go through that door. There's a willingness to know I may get shot going through that door, but that doesn't mean cops are every call is a suicide mission. And if the guy pulls the knife on me, I don't have to get stabbed. The law says I don't have to get stabbed, and so I'm not here on a suicide mission. And that's all I could think of this morning when the crowds gathered and were chanting against us out there at the scene. Is number one, you have no idea what just happened this morning here, and number two, that big guy that pulled the knife on that officer. Those officers, it's not a suicide mission. The law says I have a right to protect me. I have a right to protect you too, a third party. Mm-hmm. And the sense of not finding out facts anymore, I don't know that they want the facts anymore. It's just it appears the police did something. Let's jump on that. We don't need the facts on that. And perfect example was Ferguson. Mm-hmm. The original narrative was not accurate. Well, by then the city was burned, and it was too late at that point.
Yeah, and so let's talk about, and I think we did a good job setting up the scenario. And we're going to touch on some of the things as far as the backlash that we're seeing right now. And I will bring up kind of what a lot of people tend to blame it on. And let's talk about the media. So immediately, what comes to mind is people sit there and say, well, the media is bad because the media attacks law enforcement, that type of thing. Well, that's not anything new. The media has attacked law enforcement for decades. The media has been attacking law enforcement since the day I was born, which was 44 years ago, and the day you were born, which was like 89 years ago.
Just short of that.
But either way, that the point still reigns true is the media has not ever overall. Now there's media outlets that are favorable towards law enforcement, but the media overall has not been favorable towards law enforcement, and it's been something that we lived in our career, and we understood. But I think what the difference is not the media. And I don't want to sit here and blame the media because really, in all reality, they're doing their job. Their job is to sell BS so they can sell commercials so they can make money. The media is not about telling the truth.
Well, and I blame social media more than all media in general. There's some media that I work with in Dallas area that does a very fair job, but at the end of their day, they're going to gather what facts they're given or what they're provided, and that's a whole different topic, man. I have some of these agencies that don't want to communicate with the media, and I tell them if you don't get the facts to them, they're going to go find them. The toothless lady on the front porch of her trailer is going to give the facts if you don't communicate something, man. So you better get something to them. But social media is the downfall, man. Social media, every Facebook lawyer out there, and they have the officer convicted 40 seconds after the shootings occurred. And I think the media is becoming less and less relevant, the old traditional media. But social media, man, it's killing us.
Yeah, and I would agree. And in fact, I want to back up just a second to something that you said about transparency after one of these officer-involved incidents. Let's use Ferguson. I think one of the biggest issues with Ferguson is they kept so much information to themselves without releasing it, so it almost seemed like they were hiding something. When you sit there and say no comment, we don't have anything to discuss at this time. When there's, if you have two citizens getting a shooting, we're okay to talk about that. Oh, well, we understand that this person shot this person. We're investigating it. Well, we have the ability to tell the obvious. Now we can't go into the behind the understanding that there's a lot of things that we still need to investigate, but we can literally come out and say, here's what we had. We had a call of a possible drug transactions in the back of the apartment complex. Upon the officer's arrival, we know that the suspect ran. Our officer chased him, ended up chasing him into the woods. There was a physical altercation that occurred, and we do know that the officer had to use his firearm and shoot the suspect. Subsequently, the suspect has been pronounced deceased. Why not just tell the public that? Is there an issue of why we shouldn't do that?
No, I don't think so. And I think even if it's a big, complicated, multiple agency, long drawn-out SWAT call or whatever, at least make an appearance out there and say, I don't have the facts at the moment. I will be back. When we get the facts, I will be back here. Mm-hmm. Saying nothing or stepping out just to say no comment, that's like coming home at midnight telling your wife when she asks where you been, saying no comment, I'd rather not say. Well, she's going to assume. You better give her something. I think it's the same way. I teach PIO, public information, officer classes to give them something, man, because the bear's going to eat, and if you don't feed it a little bit, it's going to go find some honey somewhere, and they may eat you. Give them something, man. Even if it's, hey, I don't have the facts. If you'll give me till 2:00 today, I'll circle back and I'll meet with you guys here and catch you up on where we are at or what we have at the time. But I have no comment. There's nothing going on in this day and time. It immediately gives the appearance of, oh man, this is going to be a bad shooting. They're covering something. And then if you think the scrutiny's they're going to really dig then, or be in the trailer park trying to find the crazy guy that didn't see it and he's going to give his narrative.
Well, and of course those are always the case because they come out in drones whenever there's a camera there.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think they ever look for somebody that is sane. They literally look for the guy that's talking to himself and say, okay, that one will talk. But let's go back to your social media aspect of it. And I agree. In fact, one of the things I teach nationwide is social media for law enforcement. And one of the things that I talk
Great
about
class.
is, oh, thank you. I appreciate it. And one of the things I talk about is how to respond and what to do in one of these crises, because ultimately, no matter how justified you are, you're going to get bombarded with a ton of call it trolls and hate mail and that type of stuff all over social media. But that's not necessarily what we're talking about. What we're talking about is people coming out with their own opinions, people putting out and start sharing and start
as fact.
Yeah, absolutely. They create their own narrative. They create their own understanding of what happened. And what tends to happen is that just starts to become a virus of negativity and negative information and false information and those types of things that
you look down and it's been shared 3,400 times, and it's not a fact of the case.
Well, and this goes for many things, but the weird thing about it is people tend to just believe whatever they read.
Yep.
If it happened and they see it on social media and it's in a post, well, it had to happen. It had to happen that way. It had to be true, which also kind of surprises me these days because so much false information has been debunked that you would think people would say, you know what, I don't really trust anything I read anymore. But we also still have tons of idiots in the world. So that they just kind of get played on however they want to play them. And that's what the media is hoping for. And that's actually what people who write these posts and these organizations that are against law enforcement are hoping will happen is people just look at it, buy it by face value, and live it, leave it, breathe it, and continue to portray that. But yes, both of those things are enemies of us. And I think law enforcement is going to have to try to figure out even a better way to deal with those things. But more so than anything, I want to talk about what I believe, and I may be completely wrong, and you may have a different opinion on this, but what I believe is really more of the plague for law enforcement when it comes to officer-involved shootings is not the media. It's not even social media. It's the response of our police leadership to those aspects.
Absolutely.
Because
100%.
Because what we're starting to see now, and more frustrating than the media lying or developing their own story, more frustrating than these idiots on social media that come out and start putting these stories out that have no clue what they're talking about, is you have police chiefs, police administrations, that an officer could be involved in that scenario that I just got through talking about, and dependent on the police chief, that officer could be fired within the next couple hours. Literally fired.
Yeah, it's happened.
And we've seen that happen across the nation. And to the people that are sane and the people that have a little bit of insight and understanding of what really goes on here, we look at that and sit there and say, wow, how did that happen? But more importantly, I think what's more scary is the 700,000 cops in the United States watch. They watch to see what happens with this case. And they see some weak puppet police chief come out and say, you know what, and he stands up there proud with his chest out, with his little 4 stars on, and says, we took care of the problem. We took care of the problem that the officer no longer works for us, so he's on his own. We cut him out to dry, and he's on his own, and he becomes a sacrificial lamb. 700,000 cops across this nation pause for a second, and they question their own police leadership. And they look at it and they sit there and say, so wait a minute. That scenario could play out at any given second while I'm on patrol. And you mean to tell me that if I do what I was supposed to do, the only thing I knew to do, the only thing I could have done,
100% justified,
that I could lose my job and that I could be left out for essentially the media wolves to devour? Whatever happened to the idea of when I was sworn in and that police chief calls me to his desk and sits there and says, we're a family here, son. That as long as you don't lie to me, as long as you do your job right, as long as you uphold the Constitution, as long as you obey my policies, I'm going to take care of you. I call bullshit.
Yep.
I call bullshit, and I don't think that that's happening across this nation as much as it used to be whenever you and I started. And I think what the plague is, and I think what the issue is law enforcement today is having to deal with these agencies, these agency chiefs that are ultimately really are bowing down to the mob rule aspect.
Yep.
And I can tell you, like, for example, when I started law enforcement, and I think you can agree on this, when you started law enforcement, police chiefs, they just had a different aura about them and a different character about them. And I think a lot of times what's happening now is, let's talk about municipality police chiefs. Municipality police chiefs ultimately are selected by politicians. They're selected by councilmen ultimately.
Yep.
Of course, a lot of times city managers do the selection process, but it's based on what the council wants. And whenever the council says we want a police chief that's going to do X, Y, and Z, a lot of times I think what we're seeing is X, Y, and Z means bow down to everything but law and order. And that means let's make sure that we have somebody that only cares about protecting the interest of the city's reputation.
Yeah, you have to, I think as a leader, you have to decide, are you here to lead the people that you were put in charge of leading? Are you going to play politics, pander to some narratives, or bow to mob rule? You're put in a position to lead, you lead the people. And the politics aside, the issues aside, at the end of the day, you've got to lead people. And I think there was a bright spot in Dallas recently. Dallas had a chief position opening, and it got down to a short list, and all of the candidates' answers were, we need to start trying to understand the criminals, and we need to forgive the criminals, and kind of this hug a thug thing. And they didn't select any of those candidates. They went with Chief Garcia. Chief Garcia's been tweeting every day, another great lick SWAT, and posting pictures of guns and dope coming out of SWAT calls. And it was really refreshing to see that they had all these candidates lined up that were spewing the proper, we need to embrace our criminals. And they went with a chief that says, no, you take bad guys off the streets. It was really refreshing, because that's not the trend we're in right now. And I think you and I enjoyed a period of police chiefs that were actually police. I mean, they'd done stuff in their life. You got chiefs now, never been in a car chase or a foot chase or a fist fight. Well, how are they going to understand it? They've never done the job. They've never done the sausage making part of the job. They got out of the academy and spent a year in a specialized unit, and then went straight up through the ranks. And
it was usually a specialized unit that had to do with things like community policing. And although I don't want to take anything away from the idea of community policing, I'm a huge proponent for community policing. But even if you look at something that I reference all the time in all my teachings, I look at Sir Robert Peel. Sir Robert Peel says the first and foremost, number one principle is to do what? Public safety. Public safety will always trump every other thing, because ultimately that is what our job is. And yeah, there's an aspect to understanding that the police are the public and the public are the police, and I completely believe in that. But when it all comes down to it, I'm a huge believer, and even if you look at what Sir Robert Peel's principles are, everything we do, everything boils down to one thing: quality of life. Quality of life. And it's not quality of life for all. It's quality of life for the innocent. And the one thing that I think that we forget is, if we're sitting here thinking that our job as police officers is to bring quality of life, a better quality of life, to everybody within the community, well, that's not true. And the reason why is because there's about a 2% of every community that doesn't give a shit about the quality of life of the innocent. They only care about what they can victimize others in.
Yep.
Because they're the predators of society. And when we sit here and think about, hey, well, we've got to include them in the idea of a better quality of life, when they don't give two shits about the other 98% of the community that's innocent, then what tends to happen is, and what I'm seeing, and I think what we're all seeing, is we're we're sitting here catering to the 2% of people that want to be the predators, that want to victimize other people, and ultimately at the sacrificial understanding that the other 90%, 98% don't matter.
And community policing irks me a bit. Community policing has been around longer than you and I have been around. My dad used to laugh in the 60s. There was an old famous captain at Dallas PD named Captain Fritz. He was a legend at Dallas PD. Dad said in 1970 he got put in a robbery unit, and they had chased these robbery suspects all over Dallas for weeks. Couldn't catch them, couldn't find them. He said Captain Fritz walks in one day. So, what are you boys working on? He said, oh, man, we got this guy in this maroon Cadillac that's robbing these people all over South Dallas. Oh, that's going to be old so-and-so. He said Captain Fritz grabs somebody's desk phone, picks it up. Miss Johnson, your son's up to no good, and if you want to bring him up here, I won't have to send my dogs out there to retrieve him. And Dad said, God dang, man, we chased his ass for 2 weeks. Captain Fritz picks the phone up, knows everybody in the community, and Mom brings him up there, drives him to the station, and gives him to the police in 1970. That's community policing. Mm-hmm. Captain Fritz knew all the freaking people in South Dallas, picks phone call up. So all the people, we need this, we need that. Police work is relationships. We're humans. It's been around forever. It's not something new. Interactions with humans is not something new.
Well, and I'll tell you, and I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things I talk about, and I think that we will actually save that for a whole other segment. I think that was a segment we didn't even plan on going into, but we will make another segment about community policing. And just to kind of give a teaser of that, community policing is not what the bar stars and stripes stand up there in front of everybody and sit there and say, hey, we're a community policing agency. And they ask the reason, well, how can you prove that? And they sit there and say, well, we have a Citizens Police Academy. We have an Explorer program. Those are programs.
We have a sticker to prove it that
Absolutely.
says we do.
Let's get for real. Citizens policing truly is what the line officers out there doing little by little by little to gain relationship. And the relationship that we're talking about isn't always the most pretty looking relationship. The people that attend these Citizens Police Academies and these Explorer programs and all these other things, they're already people that support law enforcement. Yep. Citizens policing is more about getting people that are on the fence about who we are, and we build relationships one-on-one, instant per instant, person per person. It's not something we could send a flyer out and sit there and say, now we're a community policing agency. But we'll save that to a whole nother talk. But yeah, absolutely. But let me come back to the idea of where leadership is in these days. Like you hit on it, police chiefs. Not all of them, because there's some great police chiefs out there still.
Sure.
But I think a lot of it is because they're supported by good understanding of where and get the understanding of that 98% of society. And I think what we're missing now, what we used to have, was there would be an incident like I described, and the police chief would get up there and say, here's what happened. And once it's determined that it was a good shoot and a justifiable shoot, they stood behind the police officers, regardless of mob rule.
My first chief, we had a police shooting, family violence call. As soon as the officer pulls out, same scenario you gave, like this giant 16, 17-year-old kid comes out of the house with a huge knife, has it hand in the air, blade down, and is just bull rushing the officer. Officer shoots him. For 2 days, we get scorched in the media. Garland police kill child. My chief walks through the bay, said, if any of you sons of bitches want to come over with me, I'm going to talk to the media. And he was shaking, red in the face. And I thought, I don't know what's about to happen, but I want to go watch this. So we're walking across the city hall. He goes, y'all stand behind me. And I thought, yes, sir, whatever he's about to do. He hands out videos. It turned out it was on video. And all the press is there from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and he gets up. I'm going to show a video, and since none of y'all cared to get the facts, let me show you what happened. This giant human with a large knife raised over was threatening my officer's life, and he said, he stopped the threat and shot an armed man. Does anybody have any questions? And I'm like, oh, man, there's not a question in the audience. And he turns around, let's go, man. We walk back across the street. the media frenzy against us stopped. Literally in about 36 hours, it was a frenzy. And once our chief stood up and said, by God, that's enough, there was never another peep about it. I mean, literally another peep about it. And I thought, I didn't know what we were headed over to, but I knew he was about to try and fix it. Man, he stood up, and we were walking back across. I said, hey, boss, how's that going to go over at City Hall? He goes, man, I don't know. This may be my last day. I don't know, but that's enough of that crap. We didn't do anything wrong. That's enough of that crap, and I guess they'll fire me tomorrow. I don't know, but there was never another peep about it, man. I thought, I can get behind that leadership. I can follow that.
Well, there's 2 points in that. And one, you may have heard a small little verse called "The righteous are bold as a lion." And I think that's where we're missing is we're having leadership that is not bold anymore. And
it's the easy route, just about as easy.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about it is righteousness is always going to be righteousness. And you can live and feel good and be confident about standing behind righteousness. And I think that's the problem that we're showing and seeing is what they're doing is they're saying, hey, you know what? I'm more worried about my job. I'm more worried about my future. When in all reality, when you decide that you're going to be a leader and you're going to be a leader in law enforcement, you become the mentor now. You become something bigger than just the idea of bars, stars, and stripes. And if you are that type of leader that decides, I don't care about the men that serve under my command, I'm going to tell you, and I'm speaking to everybody that wears any kind of rank, and I'm also speaking to the line officer to hold those people accountable, because if you work for bad leadership, you need one of two things. You need to find a good leader and get out, or if you're one of those leaders, you need to demote and just be a police officer.
Well, people don't quit bad jobs, they quit bad leaders.
Absolutely.
That's in the corporate world, that's in the military, it's in law enforcement. I got brothers over in the fire side, and you want to destroy something, get a bad leader up there that doesn't take care of their people. You have to be people first, man. Sure. And if it's easier for you to bow, then turn your stars in and go do something else that's easy. Because if your people are right and your people are righteous, then you need to suck it up and do the right thing and take care of your people.
Well, and I think when you take that oath to be a police chief, there needs to be some kind of understanding that I would rather lose my job before I lose my integrity. And bowing down to that rule or that mob rule understanding of things and doing it just because the media is after you or the media is after your department and it's not making you look good. For one, that's a weak personality. But two, you are doing the disservice to the understanding of what you took the job for.
I have no doubt that was probably 1997 that occurred. I have no doubt the conviction in my chief's heart that if city council fired him 10 minutes after that press conference, he was completely at peace with what the officer did and what, as the chief, he did to take care of his people. I would wager anything that the conviction in his heart is fire me, that's fine, but I just did the right thing.
Yeah, and what I want to do, Clint, is because we're coming up on the hour, is I'm going to close this out, and but I think that we've got plenty other topics to talk about from this one. The one thing that I just want to wrap up this with, guys, is a couple things. One is stay relentless. The job is getting harder every single day, and we know that this job is getting harder every single day. In fact, to the point to where I'm blessed, Clint's blessed not to have to do this job anymore, okay? And I hear it all the time. I hear cops say this all the time. I sit down with them. I still drink coffee with the guys. At nighttime, I drink beers with the guys. And one of the things that I continue to hear is, man, I'm ready to get out. I'm tired of this BS. I'm ready to get out of it. And the one thing that I say is this, that the people that I hear that from, unfortunately, are some of the greatest cops, some of the really good cops. The cops that you police with right now, that sit there and don't do anything and kind of just hang out and those aren't the ones that are saying they want out. The good cops are the ones that are wanting out. And I'm not saying the other ones are bad cops. I'm saying they're not the proactive cops.
Yep.
And what we need in society is proactive policing, because that is a part of community policing. Those are the ones that are out there legitimately looking for the 2% out of the 98%. And they're the ones who are finding these 2% and understanding that they are the predator aspects. They're the ones who have the criminal mindset to sit there and say, I want to rob, steal, rape, do whatever it is to victimize others that are trying to live peaceful lives. If we keep pushing the way we're pushing, defund the police is not going to be an issue.
Yeah, there won't be any.
There won't be any good cops left. And I can tell you right now, and we're already seeing it in some of the cities that have decided that defunding the police was a brilliant idea. Crime rates are going through the roof. Murders are going through the roof.
Seattle, Portland, Chicago.
Right. And I'll even speak on this, that the police on public shootings, you won't have to worry about that. The public on public shootings is going to skyrocket so much. And the reason why is because the proactive policing that the good police officers do stops minor offenses or enforces minor offenses to stop the major offenses.
Yeah.
And people don't understand that. And but what I want to talk to the good officers out there doing their job is stay relentless. Guys, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I'm a huge believer that's the way it's going to be. It's going to get worse before it gets better. But hang in there, because there's going to be the 98% that is tired of being silent, that's going to speak up and say, you know what, enough's enough, and law and order needs to come back. And don't think that any of this that we're talking about, that we would ever sit up here, ever, and defend a cop that did something wrong.
Nobody hates a bad cop worse than another cop.
Absolutely. And I can tell you that if there was a cop that, and we could, don't think that there's not stories that we could talk about as that. But I can tell you those cops that love the police job, that love going out there and do great things, they cannot stand those dirty cops. Neither can we. Nobody, as Clint said, nobody can stand a bad cop more than a good cop.
And you hit on leadership, and to everybody out there that may be listening, man, stay in the fight, because leadership doesn't always have a title. I go to departments to teach and train all the time. I visit with departments, and you got the old senior dog on deep nights that nobody calls a lieutenant. They call that dude because he's the real leader in that department. And when we start losing the line leaders, the institutional knowledge, the real guys that have been out there, seen it and done it, when they start deciding, you know what, I've only got 18 years, but I'm punching out, I'm done, I can't do this anymore, and you start losing the real leaders and the institutional knowledge, the people that they turn to, that's when our profession, I think, suffers and is the turn, because leaders doesn't always have a shiny star on the collar. There's a whole lot of leaders in this world with no title, that every department has that guy or that girl that they look up to, and they follow through hell with a can of gas in their hand. And when those people stay in the fight, man, like he said, stay relentless, stay involved, because it's still an honorable profession. It's a calling. And stay in the fight, stay relentless.
And to summarize it up, guys, let me just finish it out. We do have a series, and it's some of the topics that you're going to be hearing from us is we're going to take leadership, and we're going to dissect that even more in another show. If you guys have got comments, you guys got ideas for future shows, please let us know. One of the things that we didn't talk about, but I'll touch on real quick just to end the show, district attorneys. District attorneys, yes, we have no control over that. The people vote the district attorneys in. And that ultimately is an issue that we're dealing with across the nation, where district attorneys are causing issues as well. But you know what? I think we could save that for a whole nother show.
Yeah, it's a whole topic.
Absolutely. But guys, we're going to talk about, in the future shows, we're talking about mental health. I think we're going to talk about fitness law enforcement. We're going to talk about the idea of, and even take this scenario that we talked about, and there's a whole another avenue, and whole another understanding about the scenario I gave you with the kid with the cat in the hat, because just because you may have dealt with it legally on the criminal side of things doesn't mean you're in the clear on the civil side of things, because there may be some repercussions because you didn't stay fit or didn't you weren't prepared for the fight and those types of things. So we'll talk about that as well. But guys, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate it. Clint, I always appreciate you coming by.
One last thing I'll say, guys, and we'll close it out on critical incidents. I know this weekend how many racks of ribs I'm going to put on the smoker. I know which shiner I'm going to buy. I know exactly what I'm going to do this weekend. I have a plan, and that's completely unimportant stuff. If you're involved in a critical incident, it's going to affect your life, your family, your income. It's going to change you. Have a plan of what you're going to do if you're involved in a critical incident. Make sure you have some legal protection. Know who your companion officer is. Know what you're going to do. Who may go notify your family if you're involved in one or if you're injured. Have a plan, man. If we can have a plan so insignificant about how many racks of ribs I'm going to cook this weekend, have a plan on a critical incident because it's going to affect you. Take a brief moment to have a plan for that.
Absolutely. Love it. And guys, part of your plan, get TMPA. Texas Municipal Police Association, get some kind of legal plan. That's part of your plan for pre-planning. So either way, thank you guys. God bless each and every one of you guys. Stay in the fight. Stay relentless. And until next time.